All right, we have this pear tree that was put in slightly the wrong place because sometimes you just have to get fruit trees in the ground before you really know the full vision for your space. And we've decided that we're going to espalier it to match this plum tree. They're going to be mirror images of each other, but we don't have enough room between fruit trees to do that. I have to move it over just a little bit. You can see this pear needs a lot of training still, but there are 4 big T-posts in the ground with it, and we're training it to each of those T-posts to grow straight up. And then we'll do the same here. And on the branches on the walkway side, we're going to arch them up and over, train them to meet each other. We might have to put some sort of arch structure, just a makeshift thing in place while the branches are trained to it. It's just a way to keep your fruit trees nice and tidy if you have a small space, and it just looks cool. And from all the reading I've done, you get pretty good yields considering you're taking off a lot of the branches every year. But for now, we're just going to move our pear, let it grow a bit, and then work on training further. All the fruit trees that we have planted here at the Hobby Homestead were bare root trees. So we bought the trees with just their roots being bare in dormancy. They're like stored in cold warehouses, and then you plant them right at the end of winter. So then they break dormancy in the spring. They find themselves in their new home and they just start growing. It's less of a shock to them typically. So in the spirit of bare root plantings, I'm about to move a fruit tree in the fall. It's late fall at this point. The leaves are all off of it, and we're having a bit of a rainy spell, so it's perfect time, nice and cool. I'm going to dig it up, and I'm just going to move it over a little bit. In order to move the pear, I also have to move some rhubarb. We have rhubarb all along here. It's also going dormant. Rhubarb is one of the first things to pop up in the spring. So while it is said that you can move rhubarb most successfully in the spring, it's actually kind of hard to dig it out before it starts actively growing, because it can start growing while the ground around it is still somewhat frozen. So I like to move my rhubarb in the fall. I've had success with that in the past. So here we go. We're going to do some major digging to move an entire fruit tree and a large clump of rhubarb. All right, she's free. So it's recommended to plant your fruit trees in a square hole so that when these end up going out to the side of the hole you've dug and they hit that hard soil that you haven't loosened yet, that they kind of go into that corner, and it encourages them to keep pushing their way out and growing further and further out. If you have a round hole and maybe it's too small, when they hit the edge, the hard edge from where you stop digging, they have a tendency to curl around on themselves, and then you get almost a root-bound effect in the ground where they just sort of spiral and coil inside the hole that you dug rather than venturing out. At least it takes a while for them to venture out. And we want to plant it just above where the root meets the trunk. You know the saying, the best time to plant a fruit tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. It's true. Although, I will say, if you're moving to a new place and you want to plant fruit trees, wait a season. Just try to wait a season. We waited an entire year before planting our fruit trees, and here I am still moving one of them. Because sometimes things change. Sometimes your plans change. Perfect. All right, I'm going to grab a wheelbarrow with some compost in it. This is purchased compost. Just storing it in one of our compost bays. We had a little bit left over from a load we got. Kept it here for future use. All right, then mix a little bit into the hole that the tree's going in, and then I'm going to top dress with a lot more. That's ideally how you want to feed your new fruit trees, is on top of the soil after you planted it. Should be good. Planting trees is so much easier with two people because you have to keep the tree upright and level while shoveling. But I don't have two people today, so it's all right. I'm a pro at this. I've done this many times now. It's also a good idea when you're planting a fruit tree to give it little jiggles as you're piling the soil in. That helps make sure that soil gets into all the little nooks and crannies under the roots. You don't get any big air pockets. Makes it sturdy. And roots do not want to be exposed to air for long. You can also gauge height by putting a shovel on the ground across the hole. It'll tell you where your soil is going to come up to. Pretty sure that's straight. Yeah, straight enough. Trying to pick rhubarb roots out as I see them, because there is such a thing as too much rhubarb. As someone whose freezer is constantly full of rhubarb, and the garden is slowly being overtaken by rhubarb plants. And we give a lot of rhubarb away in rhubarb season. Now it's time to top dress. Here's our pear tree now. Soon it will hopefully look like the plum, which it's been growing all season, just allowed to do its thing. So we're going to come in and prune it and continue tying it to the right stakes, probably late winter. But it will look the same eventually. And this pathway will be a bit wider. Also, next summer, spring maybe, we're putting raised beds here to mirror those. So we'll put a bed here, and we'll put a bed here. Another reason why we are espaliering these trees, just to give us a lot more raised bed growing space. Also on my task list for today is to dig up the dahlia tubers. I haven't done that yet, and it hasn't really been cold enough to warrant it, but it's going down to -5 Celsius. So it's time to dig some dahlias. Dahlias are okay in mild freezes. They can stay in the ground. Their tubers can stay in the ground in warmer climates, I think like zone 7 and up maybe. I would totally be up for experimenting with leaving these in the ground if they weren't family heirloom, or one of these is a family heirloom dahlia tuber and the other one's just the only one I have of the other color. But with global warming, some gardeners have noticed that they don't have to remove the same tubers that they used to 10 years ago. So whereas we used to have to pull our gladiolus bulbs, we don't anymore. I leave my gladiolus bulbs in the ground all winter and they come back in the spring. And maybe that's just that they've acclimated, or maybe it's because our winters just don't get as cold as they used to. There's our dahlia tubers. These are ones I bought on clearance a few years ago. No, 2 years ago. But they're really gorgeous. They're deep burgundy dinner plate dahlia. And the others are up here. Something I love about gardening is when it becomes multi-generational. So these tubers, we're going to keep them separate because they're a different color. These tubers come from dahlias that my grandfather grew in his garden. Then my mom grew them in her garden. And when my mom moved, she didn't take any with her, and so I'm hoping to save some of these for her to grow at her new place. But it's just so special to know that the genetics of this plant grew on your grandfather's farm, and I'm going to pass it on to my kids. And I guarantee they're gardeners. They'll appreciate it. I'm kind of annoyed that we turned off our outdoor water already, because I would love to spray these off outside. But I think what I'll do is just hold them into the rain barrel spout, because we do still have to empty one of our rain barrels before it freezes. I don't like plants that you have to dig through the soil for. Potatoes, sweet potatoes are my one exception. But if I have an established garden, I don't want to have to keep doing this, disturbing the soil every year. So dahlias are the only things I'm willing to do this for. Trick with dahlias is to keep them from drying out, but you also don't want them too wet in storage all winter inside your house. And so I like to just spray off the dirt enough to see where I can divide them. And then I store them in damp shavings. These are just pine shavings I use for the chicken coop. I'm just smashing these. I think I'm going to give up on dividing them. Obviously they won't store if they're all broken. Technically you should divide them, and they should come apart with a piece of stem that has a little hint of new growth on it, like a little eye, and a couple of these tubers attached to that. And that's what you plant next year. But this unholy mass, I don't know about it. So you should be able to break this stem off with a couple tubers, but they are really together. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this will be one planting for next year. Bit of a stem, 2 tubers. Bit of a stem, 4 tubers. There we go. They're coming apart now. Oh. All right. Now we need to put all of our dahlia tubers into some sawdust. So I need to go find some boxes to store them in. All right, so I have some wood shavings in here. And we're going to add some tubers. And we're going to add more damp wood shavings. I might be saving too many tubers this year. I don't know how I'm going to make them all fit. All right, I'm going to say this box is full now. I'm going to lay these out. I'm hoping at my mom's place we'll do some raised beds that are really long, maybe in front of her big, like 40, 50 foot long shed, and just do dahlias and peonies and things that are self-sufficient. Peonies will bloom first. They'll bloom early in the spring, like June, I guess, and then dahlias will come on a little later in the summer. One last thing before we wrap up for the morning. There's a million more things, but the one last thing I'm going to squeeze in right now is watering the pear tree. It's supposed to rain this afternoon, but a little bucket of water will go a long way. All right, there's a million more fall garden cleanup chores that I still have to do, but I'm going to stop for right now because I have to get working on some other things. Thanks for joining me this morning, and I hope that you will come and grow with us.